Welcome to Techopia. Thank you very much for joining us here today on our Facebook page. If you haven't done so already, make sure that you like our Facebook page. And if you haven't done so already, make sure you join us each and every Monday and Wednesday. Today we are here at the Innovation Center at Bayview Yards. And today we are talking to truly, once again, very interesting gentlemen, founders of the company called Spectrafy. So here with me, closest to me, we have Richard, which is the CEO and president of Spectrafy, and then, of course, Victor, which is the CTO and co-founder as well of Spectrafy. So thank you very much for joining us today, gentlemen. Now, for those of you that haven't heard of Spectrafy just yet, what's wonderful about this company is that they have recently been tapped by the federal government, specifically their sensors, to build the world's first national solar spectral network. Now, that sounds pretty fancy already when you hear it the first time round. But today we want to find out a little bit exactly what this technology is and, of course, how it'll benefit our country. So, what I want to ask you firstly, Richard, let's start off with you. How is the federal government using your technology? Give us a little bit of insight on that.
Sure. So the sensors that we make are really very highly functional weather and meteorological sensors. So historically, you've had two types of sensors for measuring sunlight in the atmosphere. At one end, you've had sensors that are relatively simple, measure maybe one thing, and there's a lot of those deployed in industry. And at the other end, you have a lot of really complex, maybe difficult to use and expensive sensors that are deployed for scientific applications. And so what we've done at Spectrafy is put those two worlds together and developed a sensor technology that combines some pretty simple rugged hardware with some proprietary software that really allows us to make it easy and affordable to measure make detailed measurements of sunlight in the atmosphere that have historically been very expensive. And so that's important, increasingly important in industries like the solar industry, the weather industry, and agriculture, where those industries are increasingly demanding the highest quality of solar and atmospheric data in order to de-risk their businesses. And now with our sensors, they can do that in a way that's practical and affordable, which they couldn't do before. So what the government's done, and the interest came out of Natural Resources Canada and the group there that does a lot of the solar research for the government. So they've deployed a network of 7 stations of our sensors around the country from coast to coast to coast. The highest one's up in Cambridge Bay, the Canadian High Arctic Research Station. And put out there for, the main reason that it's out there is to get better spectral data for solar resource assessment and determining not only how the solar panel technologies of today are performing, but also how the technology of the future will perform in different climates around Canada. In addition to that, there's some of the atmospheric components that come off the sensors that are useful in weather and climate modeling and as metrics for monitoring environmental health. Yeah, that wasn't too short. But.
No, I don't want. No, I want you to explain this, and I think it's so important for us to truly understand. Now, as you said, there's very important data that is accumulated through these sensors, and Victor, maybe you can speak a little bit to that. What is that data? And you have mentioned already and kind of touched on it how that data is being used, but maybe you can give us some more insight on that.
Yes, so basically there are two types of data that you can kind of divide in major categories that come from our sensors. It's the irradiance data and the atmospheric data. So the irradiance data basically tells you what is amount of sunlight, so watts per meter squared that hits the surface of the Earth. And there's 3 different types of sunlight. So there's a direct sunlight that comes directly from the sun, and there's a diffuse sunlight that kind of scatters from clouds and trees, and together combinations of those two create a global irradiance. So solar panels in different climates will be exposed to different types of this irradiance. And for Canadian researchers, it's important to know where this irradiance is coming from, the amount of this irradiance coming from different directions. So with the irradiance data that our sensors provide, Canadian researchers can have a better understanding of a resource potential, solar resource potential of a country. We have a vast country, and our stations could basically ground truth some of the satellite data that is used to derive some of these models to predict how well your solar panels would perform in a particular location. And the atmospheric data, as Richard mentioned, some of the things that we can derive from our sensors are ozone content, aerosols, water vapor. So these parameters have historically been very expensive to obtain with very cumbersome, power-hungry equipment. So our sensors allow to provide these data to Canadian researchers at a fraction of the cost, all in one portal. And this kind of data, such as ozone content or aerosols or water vapor, is used in climate studies to assess the impact of climate change across Canada and worldwide.
No, thank you very much for sharing that. Now, the other question I'd like to ask, I mean, you guys you've started this company, and it's been an evolution for you. It's been a short period of time since this company's really launched, so to speak, but it has been a process to get to this point. So maybe you can share with me a little bit, and I love talking about this because Belarus, initially from Belarus, I'm from South Africa originally, yourself from New Zealand. We're sitting here together, and both a company that has started in Ottawa. So give us a little bit of the background, Richard, maybe, of how you guys have met and how this has come to fruition, and why did you decide on sensors per se and not just huge solar panels?
Yeah, sure. So I guess I came to Ottawa maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And so we both met at the University of Ottawa. There's a group called the Sun Lab there that does a lot of solar research. So I first came to that group to do a postdoc, and I spun out a first company there called Kofovo Energy to work on advanced solar panels. And then at the same time, Victor was working at another solar startup in Toronto, working with a lot of spectral data. And at both companies, we could see that we wanted to be able to deploy the capability to measure spectral data routinely. And at the time, it was very expensive. So it cost you maybe $50,000 to put out a device called a spectroradiometer to do that. And then you'd have to maintain that. And working with the data wasn't always easy. So Victor came back to the university to do his master's to solve that problem. The idea that if all you want to do is measure solar spectra, is there a simple, affordable way to do it? So, I mean, you launched your first prototype 2012. I joined in 2014, and then we launched the first product version in 2015 out of Kofovo. And then it became clear that, the technology really had legs, and we could see, and we still see, a pretty exciting runway of development for it and things we can do with it. So we spun out Spectrafy from Kofovo at that point to focus on the sensors, seeing that it was going to be much less capitally intensive and much better profit margins in terms of developing sensors that can go into aid the entire solar industry rather than trying to develop a solar panel to compete against the rest of the solar industry.
Yeah, no, I'll just add is that, so Richard mentioned that I came back from a startup company I was working prior to joining Sun Lab at the University of Ottawa. So just a little backstory. So I worked for Morgan Solar, was a startup in Toronto. So basically, I wanted to do my master's, and I really liked the company, and I thought, one day I perhaps would like to work for this company after finishing my master's. So I asked my supervisor at the time, Dr. Mearskog, says, Stefan, do you think of any cool projects I can work on while doing my master's? Because I want to keep that kind of industry link alive. And he says, Victor, how about you figure out the way how to measure solar spectrum cost effectively? So that was really the initial seed behind this idea, and come back to Sun Lab and having access to the researchers and all equipment basically made that idea happen and result in this. Yeah.
So awesome. Here we are. That's wonderful, and I love that. That's such an interesting story that you've taken that suggestion and you've now literally turned it into a company, which is spectacular. Now, here you are, once again, government has invested with you and working on this project with you. That means a lot. So for yourself, what do you see the future looks like for Spectrafy?
Yeah, the future looks good.
Right.
Yeah.
No pun intended.
Exactly. No, so a couple years old. Definitely the contract we've had with the government to deploy these sensors has been great from a couple of standpoints. Financially, it's helped us, get the company up and running, and at the same time, it provides a great marketing and advertising tool for us, a real data point showing, we can deploy these sensors in a network, connect them over the cloud, and provide the data. So now we've talked a bit about the sensors are really valuable from a research perspective, and they definitely are. And we've sold a lot into research groups and national labs, but they're also very appealing for meteorological networks, such as the one we've deployed for Canada. And based on that, we've had interest from other meteorological networks around the world, because they like the idea that they can now deploy a single 1 or 2 sensors to get all this data that was historically very expensive, A, to deploy, and B, to maintain. So we see that as quite an interesting market moving forward. And then we've talked about the solar industry, right? And so there's thousands of fairly basic solar sensors that are deployed in the solar industry, and we really see our technology as the next step forward for that industry standard device. So we're focusing on packaging the technology into a product that is appealing and deployable for the solar industry. And that's, I think if we can nail that, that's where the volume and the growth is going to come from long term.
Fantastic, wonderful. Anything you want to add? Or no? Yeah, good. Sounds pretty good. So there you go. It looks like you guys have a pretty solid plan lying ahead, and congratulations on all the hard work you've done. And it's wonderful to see that educational institutions combined with government, combined with just pure entrepreneurship, all comes together. And here we are discussing what your company is doing in a very short space of time, and so much to do. Looking forward. So congratulations on all of that, and we look forward and seeing a lot more, and looking forward to that bright future that you guys will create. For those of you that's watching this, we were here today with Richard and Victor. Richard, CEO, President, co-founder of Spectrafy, and of course Victor, CTO and co-founder as well of Spectrafy. Congratulations, guys. Make sure that you check us out here on Techopia each and every Monday and Wednesday to find out more about the amazing companies that is literally just launching into the atmosphere from here in Ottawa. And then, of course, go check out techopia.ca. We have an article of Spectrafy on there already, but we'll have more content there as well. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thanks, Colin.
Thank you, guys.